Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas is one of the most iconic gangster films of all time. The mafia movie classic, starring Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, chronicles the true life story of mafia hood Henry Hill, as recorded by crime journalist and author Nicholas Pileggi in his book Wiseguy. Henry's roller coaster of a life in the mob is explored in the film, following his and his friends' illegal exploits including murder and drug trafficking, and comes crashing down to a halt when Henry ends up fighting to keep himself out of jail on drug charges, and his mob associates fear he may turn informant in order to save his own skin, and thus they make plans to murder him. Ironically, Henry's realization of this actually drives him to become a rat, and he sends his two closest associates, Jimmy and Paulie, to jail based on his testimony in the movie's final courtroom scene. Along the way of Henry's coked up escapades, Tommy DeVito, the volatile and irate mobster played by Joe Pesci, meets a sticky end when he ticks off one too many people, and in the final scene, where Henry steps out of his new home whilst in the witness protection program, it is Tommy who we see, in a perplexing, seemingly out of place shot where he randomly is shown shooting straight at us at the camera, in the middle of the film's final scene. So what is the reason for this strange shot existing in the film? Well, director Martin Scorsese has addressed this, as in an interview for the American Film Institute, he said that he was paying homage to the 1903 11-minute silent film The Great Train Robbery, widely considered to be one of the first narrative films ever made, and which ends with a robber firing a gun repeatedly at the camera. According to Scorsese, The Great Train Robbery and his film are essentially the same movie, despite being made almost 100 years apart. He said, "Basically, in Goodfellas, there's a bunch of outlaws who do this incredible robbery and they all kill each other. The police get them at the end. It's exactly the same story." It looks as though Scorsese was looking to make a link with the seemingly universal fascination and obsession with gangsters and criminals in American pop culture, using a vivid and quite literally in-your-face homage in his gangster film to what could be considered the first gangster film ever made. When you strip away the details and leave the bare bones, both films are about criminals who rob and steal their way ahead until the law finally catches up with them in the end. Audiences would often watch westerns to see cowboys and gunslingers rob, shoot and steal their way through the lawless land of the West. In spite of how brutal these characters often are, they capture our imaginations, and audiences from young children to grown men find themselves pointing an imaginary gun at themselves in the mirror of their bathrooms, pretending to be John Wayne or Clint Eastwood. With the death of the Western in cinema, and therefore the gunslinger, an argument could be made that these macho criminals were replaced with mobsters, another type of film character that, in spite of how evil and violent they often are, capture our imagination in such a way that we envy them and want to live the kinds of lives they live, which is what Goodfellas is about in the first place. So there's a nice connection there, a parallel with the cowboy and the mobster both shooting at the camera. The shot of Joe Pesci is also accompanied by the Sid Vicious song My Way, with the lines, "Regrets? I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention," which perfectly encapsulates the mindset of protagonist Henry Hill at the end of the film, who, in spite of leading a criminal lifestyle where he's lucky to escape with his life and to avoid jail time, he laments the fact that he has to wait in line like everyone else and doesn't get the correct food that he orders. So that's why the shot exists, heard straight from the mouth of the director. It's simply a homage to The Great Train Robbery. It probably isn't really anything too deep or allegorical. It might be an unconventional shot to insert just before the final shot of the film, but Goodfellas is full of narrative methods that were unconventional at the time. But film fans can still ponder as to whether there is a way in which the shot of Pesci shooting at the camera works within the narrative or has thematic depth to it. It could be seen with Henry looking at the camera, the shot of Pesci, and then the cut back to Henry smiling as he walks back into his new home, as Henry actually looking at Tommy, who in this case is the representation of the mob life, and Henry turning his back on Tommy is him turning his back on the life, and Tommy shooting the gun, almost like a warning from above, or below. in this cautionary tale from a character who also lived the life, and it killed him. Pesci firing the gun at the camera can also quite simply project the idea that Henry Hill has to live out the rest of his days looking over his shoulders, lest a mobster sneaks up behind him and delivers a bullet-based punishment for turning rat. The ending can also be seen as a visualization of the reality of the gangster lifestyle for us as the audience, on the outside looking in the sense that when we think of gangsters, especially gangsters on the big screen, this image of Joe Pesci pretty much sums up the archetypal mobster look. The hat, the suit, the gun, the senseless violence in the action of shooting at the camera for no reason, even the choice of actor who is most known for and typecast as a gangster. He looks so cool, so macho, and as men we're envious of him. We've just sat through an entire film where these guys get away with whatever they want. We see this image of the ideal gangster, but then we cut to Henry Hill, in his slippers and nightgown, having to live the rest of his life in fear and as a schmuck, as he puts it. And it's like the film is telling us, this is what you think of when you think of gangsters, but this is a real gangster, and look how his life ended up. And also, for those who didn't quite get the message of Goodfellas, if they look at the final shot of Tommy shooting at the camera and are thinking, this guy looks so cool, they probably should take a second to remember how this character ends up in the film. Another interpretation could be that it's signalling the death of Henry, not in the sense that he dies at the end of the film, but in the mob culture, nothing is worse, no status is lower than that of a rat, which Henry has become. Not only has he ratted out his friends, but in doing so he's given up the life of the gangster. His high status where he can get away with just about anything is gone now. He's back down at our level. The life of the 9-to-5er, the taxpayer, the schmucks and the bums. He has to wait in line just like everyone else. And as Henry's narration tells us, the fact that he can no longer live the life, quite hilariously, is his biggest regret. It's a fate worse than death for the mobster. It is death, seeing as though his gangster life has been terminated, and this is symbolized in Pesci shooting at Henry. The idea of Henry being lowered down to our level is also referenced in the courtroom scene that precedes the ending of Goodfellas, where Henry breaks down his narration, breaks the fourth wall, comes right up to the camera and talks to us, face to face. Now he's been brought down to our level, his story is now over. It's as if Henry being demoted down to our level, from gangster to average Joe, is incorporated into the structure of the film itself, as he goes from narrator to simply being another character. This interpretation doesn't quite work, because even after the courtroom scene, Henry continues his narration, but it's still a theory I like. So what are your thoughts on the ending of Goodfellas? And what do you make of the shot of Joe Pesci emptying his pistol at the camera? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.